Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Creative Piecemeal. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi, and today I am with Andrew A.S. Hatch, author and friend of mine. A.S. Hatch grew up in Thornton Cleveleys, a small town near Blackpool. After graduating with a degree in journalism, he moved to Taipei, Taiwan, where he taught English as a foreign language for 2 years before moving to Melbourne, Australia. Andrew returned to the UK in 2013 and now lives in London, where he works in political communications. He began writing fiction at university, and his novel Los Gigantes was shortlisted for the Luke Bitmead Prize in 2013, and his short story Flies was chosen by Word Books Ltd. as their short story of the month in October 2012. His current novel, This Little Dark Place, which is fantastic, I highly recommend it, is available at booksellers worldwide. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Hello. Well done on the pronunciations of those obscure places, by the way. Cleveleys, spot on. Melbourne, spot on. A lot of people say Melbourne, including my mum, but you got it right, so mazel tov on that.
Thank you. Oh, I credit my love of British shows for all those pronunciations.
Well done. And your love of geography, of course.
Right. Such a geography nerd. So excited to have you on this show. Before we jump into current projects, I'd love to start with who or what inspired you to become an author?
Who or what? I guess you could answer this in both ways then, couldn't you, really? I'm going to say, I know it's a basic answer, really, to name an author, but it was love of reading that got me into writing. And probably it was A Wild Sheep Chase by Haruki Murakami that did it. Yeah. So I don't know if you knew that, but I fell in love with that book. And so I was a voracious reader when I was a little kid, from say the age of 7, maybe 6 even, all the way through to 11. And then I went to high school, we call it. I don't know what grade that would be in America, but we call it high school. And I just stopped reading. It wasn't a conscious decision. And then I only started reading again when I was about 19. So there was a massive gap. And the book that did it was a friend of mine, is a real Japanophile, and he taught himself fluent Japanese to the extent that he moved over there and worked as a translator in the fashion industry. Amazing guy. He said, Hatch, you'll really love this author, Murakami. And obviously, Murakami's world famous. I, as I say, hadn't read a book for about 8 years by that point. So I was like, okay, whatever. And wow, it was like fireworks going off in my head. I couldn't believe, actually, that fiction could be so contemporary, because the books I'd read as a boy were the typical stuff like Lord of the Flies, The Hobbit, classic adventure stories, written in sort of an archaic mid-20th century sort of way, about, fantastical stuff. And then Murakami's writing about having a beer and making spaghetti and cats and, everyday relationships. And it really chimed with me at that point in my life. And I read the first half of it on a beach in Spain, and then I read the next half of it and on the plane home, and then I read the rest of it back home. So this was a summer holiday in between, I think, my first and second year of uni. And then I just started writing straight away. It just started coming out of me. So I wrote this really, it's probably not very good now, but I was 19. I wrote 1,000 words, basically describing my flight home from that holiday. Because it did inspire me. I just thought, wow, you don't need to have the world's biggest vocabulary to write. And I know it's translated from Japanese to English, although he does write in English first and then translates it to Japanese. I think that's what he does these days. I don't know what sort of linguistic acrobatics he's performing there, but that's a tidbit for you. But even so, the language in it was so everyday. It was graspable. and relatable. And I just thought that is really, really cool. And I can give that a go, because I'm a relatively intelligent guy. I was studying journalism, so I was writing all the time, sort of these, process-driven articles designed for newspapers. But I thought I wanted to be a bit more creative. So why don't I try and copy Murakami? And I basically just copied Murakami. And then I made that into a whole novel, which no one mercifully will ever read. And it is such a rip-off of Murakami, it's untrue. There's like a talking dog in there and everything. So I would say that moment on that beach in Spain, when I had an ice cream and a book in my hand, was when I thought, wow, anyone can do this. And obviously there's a bit of hubris involved there, because obviously not everyone can do it, but I think that's what started it. And the other aspect of your question was what inspired me. So, or the flight home, actually. It was the flight home that inspired me, because it was so dreadful. There was such a smelly person next to me, I remember. And I just thought, I'm gonna use this. I'm gonna write about this and use that as catharsis, to whinge about this horrible flight with this stinky person next to me. So yeah, it doesn't always have to come from something positive, but yeah, that's how I started. And I virtually never stopped writing since then. And that was, God, I'm 35 now. So do the math, as you would say in America. We would say do the maths, but.
That sounds really, really interesting. This is one of my favorite questions that I ask the guests, is who or what inspired them to go on to what they've done. And I just love the diversity of the answers. And it's so interesting that yours it was just like this one author just changed your whole life.
Yeah, and I just went on a massive Murakami binge after that. I've since learnt my lesson to space out good things in your life. You need to stretch out the joy in. So, for example, I'll go back to writing in a second. I've only recently started playing Dark Souls 3 because I'm so desperate for it not to be over. So I've been putting it off for ages. I've started playing it now. But back then, I didn't know that's what you should do with good things. So I just binged it all. I read I've basically read everything he'd ever written throughout the rest of my university career. And it was some of the best moments of my life. I remember third year at uni reading A Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, which is quite a meaty one. And I remember my mates going out. We were back in the halls of residence in third year, and they were like, "Are you coming out, Hatch?" And you just have your door wide open, people just wander in and out. And I was just, my nose was in this book, and I had just forgotten about this big night out they were all having, because I've been reading all afternoon. And then I was like, actually, no, I'm going to stay in and read. And I was still reading when they got in at 3 a.m. And I vividly remember that. Yeah, I guess you can't get into a video game or a film in that same deep way that you can with a book. And I was just never without Murakami. And then after uni, when I'd caught up with his entire back catalogue, I had to wait a bit for a book to come out. And by that point, I was officially, a fanboy. I was a reader. I was looking ahead I was Googling when this guy's next thing was coming out, which I'd never done with anything other than video games before. And it was After Dark that came out. I think it was 2007 or 2008. And it is strange, but because looking back now, I would say my reading taste has become a bit more refined and way more diverse than just, especially men. I consciously read a lot more female authors in the last sort of 5 to 7 years, because I met someone at work called Carol, an Irish lady who's intimidatingly well read, and we talk about books all the time. We go to see plays. We went to see all the Oscar Wilde plays when they were playing at the Strand, actually, a couple of years back. And she said, you need to read more women. You need to read more women. You need to read Bronte, and she listed them all. So I went on a huge diet of female writers. Looking back now, Murakami is actually, I guess this is part of the joy of it. It's actually quite basic, and maybe it's sort of comfort reading. It's like sitting down with a bowl of cereal, reading Murakami. That's what it feels like. It's like listening to your favorite band, even though you know that in your heart, there's probably better bands out there, and you know that. And it certainly isn't Chopin, but you still come back to, Blink-182 or whatever every so often, and it's great. I'm doing Murakami a disservice there, because he's not the Blink-182 of the writing world. He's more like the Radiohead of the writing world, but he's still not Chopin. Do you see what I mean?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. But there's nothing wrong with comfort reading either. And people talk about guilty pleasures. I don't think there's actually, and when we were chatting before this you started recording, I mentioned a guilty pleasure. There's no such thing, really. I think we should drop that phrase, guilty pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
There's just pleasures, aren't there? And reading is just a virtue. It's a good thing, no matter who you read. But yeah, if anyone's not read Murakami, A, why not? And B, just start today, because it'll make you feel, especially in these sorts of, I know everyone goes on about these times we're living in, but it's such a comfort to read him. And if you're a writer, an aspiring writer, reading something like that, the themes he tackles, which aren't always big, world-saving themes, they're just everyday people struggling. Like it might be a guy in a bar that's upset because he's going through a divorce, or it might be a painter that's struggling with a piece of work he's working on. We're not always talking about life and death with Murakami, but it just gets under your skin. I don't know how else to describe it. And they're always so riveting. Like they're weirdly not plot heavy, but it drives you through it like a thriller. So yeah, it's got a bit of everything. So yeah, he absolutely inspired me to get going.
Excellent. Yeah, no, he's fantastic. I first read him in grad school when a piano student's parent gave me a book of his as a Christmas gift, and I had not read Murakami before, and of course, being of Asian heritage, I was like, I really need to get into this and learn more about my culture. And they were engraved in my brain, like simplistic but beautiful, and like you said, everyday plots, everyday stories, everyday people, but that's what made it so unforgettable.
Yeah, it's quotidian, but it's not banal, isn't it? I guess that's the best way to describe it. It's like he makes the everyday interesting.
Yes, and heartbreaking in some aspects.
Yeah, that's absolutely. For me, the best books have brains, but they've also got a heart, and his books are dripping with heart. Yeah, they're really sweet pieces of work, and also really sinister in parts as well. Really, really dark. He's got range. The boy's got range. Definitely.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
definitely.
He's actually really massively into music as well. So he owned a jazz bar before he became a writer. And his story this is also quite inspiring for anyone that's thinking about a career in writing. He owned a jazz bar in Tokyo, and I forget the name of it. I think it's called something to do with a cat. And he used to write after the shifts. So he, clean up the bar, do the till, lock the doors, and then he'd sit there and write for a bit. And then he wrote his first extended piece of work and submitted it to a prize. And he won that prize, and that made him think, oh, maybe I could actually be a writer. And so for a while, he tried to work on his first novel whilst running a bar, but then he decided to just go all in on the writing, and then he sold his bar because he's a huge jazz fan, it comes up a lot in his books, actually, music and especially jazz. And there was a book he released, I think it was 2019 or something like that, very recently, where it's a non-fiction book, and it's basically him in conversation with some classical musician, just dissecting the world of music.
I remember seeing that. Yeah, I haven't read it, but I remember seeing that released.
I haven't actually read that. I don't really class that as one of his pieces of work, but I should probably maybe ask for it for Christmas or something.
So in addition to Murakami, are there other authors who are your favorites or who sort of struck you and inspired you in similar ways?
Love this question. This is probably my favorite question, and you need to be careful here because I'll probably talk for about 3 hours now.
That's okay.
But yeah, oh my God, where to start? David Foster Wallace. He's my literary hero. He's sadly not with us anymore, obviously, famously. But oh my God, he's the Pele of writing. He's someone that's just born with it. I know he grew up in a very literary family. I think his parents worked in academia, and he describes in Infinite Jest scenes around the dinner table where they're sort of trying to outdo each other on the vocabulary front. And you just know that's lifted from his life. Like, you can just picture it. And I've loved every single, what's amazing to me about Infinite Jest is it's obviously 1,000 pages, but it's as tight as a drum. There's not an ounce of flab on that piece of work. I can't even begin to imagine the fear that would have gone through his publisher's brain when he's delivered this manuscript and it's, 500,000 words or whatever, a stupid amount of words it is. But then when they started to read through it with their red pen at the ready, finding, oh, actually, I'm on page 100 here and I haven't had to touch this at all with my red pen. They must have just thought, oh my God, what is this? This is ridiculous. It's like he's an alien or something. It's like he's Yeah, his command of language is astonishing and intimidating and inspiring. And he's someone that you can just dip into as well. You don't have to read Infinite Jest. You don't have to read The Pale King. You can read his collections of essays that he did for the New Yorker, or you could read his short stories, which also happen to be the best short stories ever written as well. I mean, the guy was just, the word genius is bandied around, but I mean, truly genius, real virtuoso. Everyone that listens to this podcast needs to immediately go and purchase some David Foster Wallace right now. It's literary fiction, right? So it's not plot driven. That happens to be my cup of tea, but it's all about the language, and it's so creative, and he's so free. There's some short stories where he seems to invent his own dialect and his own format. Like you've just never seen it before. There's like boxes all over the pages pointing to each other and footnotes with footnotes, which sounds tedious and laborious, but it's really not. It's like choose your own adventure. It feels exciting to read it, and do buy it in physical form as well. I can't imagine that translates very well on a Kindle or other e-readers that are also available, by the way. Yeah, DFW is the king of kings, and I really bitterly regret that his life is over, and it's so tragic the way it ended. And actually, there's if you're just intrigued about him as a person, love dogs as well. It's another thing that I go weak at the knees for dogs, and I adore dogs. And so I've never owned a dog, but I intend to one day when I've got the space for it. He owned lots of dogs. He adopted them. There's actually a really decent film with the bloke from How I Met Your Mother, Jason Segel. I want to say Jason Segel.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. And he plays David Foster Wallace on this sort of infamous weekend that a journalist comes to interview him, do an extended interview at his house. Don't know where he lived. It looked like Minnesota. It looked freezing or something. And yeah, it's really good, actually. I don't remember what it's called, but if you just IMDb Jason Segel, if I've got that correct, it'll come up. And it's a good film. And once you've watched that, you'll undoubtedly want to pick up one of his books. So yeah, David Foster Wallace, Roberto Bolaño, a Chilean author, or Chilean, as they say on CNN. And he's also got a magnum opus that's 1,000 pages, or pretty much 1,000 pages. It's called 2666. And he wrote it when he had cancer. It was the last thing he wrote. And he knew he was dying. And so what I really love is when the authors, there's a real story behind it. Whenever there's a real story behind a piece of work, that adds value, that enriches it, sort of mystifies it for me. So he wrote this book when he was dying, slowly dying of cancer. And he wrote it in 5 volumes so that his estate would make more money, so that he could support his family after he was gone. And what's a true mark of the book's greatness is that his children read the manuscripts, plural, 5, and said, "No, Dad, this has to be released as one piece of work. It's a masterpiece. You can't just chop it up into 5. Appreciate that, but you need to release this as a book." And wow, it's incredible. It covers the whole globe. It covers the whole of the 20th century. And again, it's drum type. I know this is in translation. It was written presumably Spanish. He's from Chile. But it was less about the language for me and more about the sort of breathtaking scope and range of it, because it covers everything from academia to the drug cartels in the Sonoran Desert, to boxing, to politics, to the World War II and the concentration camps. It's truly epic, and it just went by in a flash. 1,000 pages went by in a flash. You know, I told you before we started recording, I slogged through 200 pages of Bleak House before Christmas, and I've since put it on ice. Yeah, 1,000 pages of 2666 felt like reading 10 pages of Bleak House. It was so much fun. His most famous work is probably The Savage Detectives. And you can spot Woody Harrelson reading The Savage Detectives in the movie Now You See Me, by the way. I spotted that on the trailer once, which is not as good as 2666, but it's not far off it. And everything I've ever read of Bolaño is amazing. So David Foster Wallace, Roberto Bolaño, Franz Kafka, Oscar Wilde. I think alongside David Foster Wallace, Oscar is probably the most naturally gifted writer I've ever read. And when I'm talking about being gifted, I value plot far less than I do language and the quality of the prose. And obviously Oscar wrote mostly plays. But if you read De Profundis, his letter from prison to Alfred Bosie, which is I think I've thought of the right word, epigraph of This Little Dark Place. There's a quote from it in This Little Dark Place. The prose in that is astonishing. It's like a punch in the nose. It's so angry, but so articulately angry. You know, when you've had an argument with someone and then you think afterwards, oh, I wish I'd said that. But in the moment, you can't, because you just can't control your emotions, and your language just becomes turd, and you end up saying the worst put downs ever. Well, Oscar Wilde had all the time in the world to think about the best put downs, of which he was the master anyway, to begin with. Think about all the amazing withering one-liners in, An Ideal Husband and Ernest and all the rest of it. So he had ages to think about, to reflect on his hatred for what had happened to him. And the words burn on the page from De Profundis. It's astonishing. And it's not fiction. It's not fiction at all. So those four guys. And I have to mention Ali Smith. Ali Smith, I think, is the best writer in the world today. She's just last summer, the fourth part of her seasonal quartet came out. So in 2016, she released Autumn, and each front cover, and then the following year, Winter, and then Spring, and then last summer she released Summer. And the artwork on the sleeves is beautiful. It's digital artwork done by David Hockney, because he works a lot on his computer now and he produced original pieces of artwork for the front cover of all three. So it's the same. If you Google it and go on Amazon or other book selling websites, and you look at the front cover, it's of this tree in a country lane in some place in England, but of the tree in these different seasons. So it's sort of like you can see how the tree's like losing its leaves and then it grows them back. So this quartet of novels, she wrote at breakneck speed. And I went to see her talk at the British Library late in 2019. One of the last things I actually got to do before. So it might have been early 2020. And she was describing the process for writing these books. And basically, I mean, she's well established, so she could basically dictate terms to her publisher. She could, and she did. She basically told them, guys, I want to write books in a matter of weeks so that they're super contemporary, and I want you to print them and publish them within 6 to 8 weeks of me finishing them and the editing being done. And they did it. So she was in the thing that kicked the whole project off, I think, was Brexit. And she wrote Autumn, the first one, in the immediate aftermath of the referendum, the EU referendum. And so it's all about that. And if you ever want a snapshot of what life is really like for, I guess, middle class-ish people in this country, in this day, read those books, because it's spot on. It's not just sort of a daily description of what it's like to go to Pret for a coffee, although, that stuff's in there. It goes back into history and it makes comparisons with things that have happened in the past. World War II is in there. It links heavily to art and pop culture and music and niche cultural figures from the 60s. And it's got a whole breadth of topics in there. So it's a real edifying experience just to read them anyway. But if anyone's interested in America, finding out what's it actually like to live in England, I know she's Scottish, but it's mainly deals with England. Read those books. She was shortlisted for the Booker for at least one of them, maybe even two of them. But weirdly, she didn't win. I don't know why. So I guess she's my hero at the moment. And I love the fact that she's an environmentalist. And in an interview with The Guardian, she said something that was so profound and so basic and so just obvious. It just struck me and stuck with me. And it was, they were asking her about books and Brexit and politics and all blah, 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 blah. And she said, none of this matters because climate change, full stop. I was like, wow, of course, yeah, none of that is going to matter, is it? When we're all underwater in 65 years. So Yeah, she's a real prophet and a beacon, and everyone should seek her out. And quite apart from all of that important highfalutin stuff, the prose is sublime. And the lack of punctuation is so, there is punctuation in there, but it's not heavily punctuated. It just feels like once your brain clicks with that, it just feels good to read it. It's so fast. And you'll sit down with one of these books and then 50 pages have just flown by. And there's no effort at all. And there's no pretense with her. The vocabulary is, I think, intentionally restrained. So I think that's the mark of a real confident writer, when you can write in simple language, in simple sentences. That's the mark of confidence, I think, and someone that's really comfortable with the way with their voice on the page. Looking back at the way I used to write first starting, it's full of massive words. It was full of like words I'd probably looked up, to be honest with you, in the thesaurus, which is cringe central. But now my language is, I try and take the lessons from the likes of Ali Smith and keep it simple. And I think it results in more elegant prose ultimately, and more confident sounding prose, and more pleasurable to read ultimately. That's what it's all about. So yeah, I guess those 5. There's probably loads more. I could probably just look around really and have a quick look. No, I'll stick with them. I think John Banville. John Banville is an amazing linguist, I guess. I'm probably not using that right. But I read The Sea, which he won the Booker Prize for in, I think, 2005. And he does use big words and he's not afraid of them, but he uses them in a way that makes you think, oh, this guy probably just talks like that, so that it's acceptable. So, and that's where I learned the word effluvia. So I like to use the word effluvia in conversation from time to time now. So yeah, look that one up. There's tons more, but I guess they're the ones that spring to mind.
It sounds like a really well-rounded group of authors as well. I've heard of some of them, but have not read all of them, and I'm interested in reading Ali Smith for sure.
Oh, you need to get on that. Definitely get on that. I'm looking over to my bookshelf now, actually, and I'm pretty content with the list, I think.
It's a good list. It's almost like, what would you take to a desert island? Oh yes, I love Margaret Atwood.
Stick Atwood on there.
Yes. I wrote her a fan email once when I was in undergrad. I just finished reading The Handmaid's Tale and I was just blown away, and I wrote her an email and told her how much I loved it, and she actually wrote back. And
no way.
Yes, of course. I don't.
You have an original piece of Margaret Atwood writing.
Well, I used to. I think it was on my university email, and I don't think I ever printed it off. You know how when you graduate, they lock you out, things like that. But,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you remember what she said?
Something kind. Short and sweet. She's just a dear treasure to the world.
Yeah, a good Canadian.
Yes. I've never actually gotten into the TV show. I'm so afraid that it will mar my memories and feeling of reading the book.
Well, I can put your mind at rest, Tammy, because the TV show is fabulous, and it's got Elizabeth Moss in it, who happens to be, I think, the best actor in the world at the moment as well.
She is very good.
She does that like boiling kettle of rage look very well. I can picture her like sort of holding her breath to make her face tremble, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
She does that quite a lot in Handmaid's Tale. It's really excellent. Don't be afraid. Dive in. It's excellent. And actually, it goes off in a tangent. And what's really amazing about it is that I'm not going to spoil any of this, but when she wrote the Testaments, it's over there. Is it called the Testaments? Yeah. When she wrote the Testaments, I've actually read it. Some of the stuff that was happening in the TV show made its way into the Testaments.
That's interesting.
So have you read the Testaments?
Not yet.
Okay, I won't spoil it then, but definitely, don't be afraid to read that either. I mean, it's not going to have the same impact on you as The Handmaid's Tale would have, I imagine. Objectively, it probably is just as good a piece of writing, but nothing's ever as good as the first time, is it? But yeah, read that and also watch the TV show. It's great. It's really, really prestige telly.
I'll have to put that
watch
on my
with confidence.
Obviously, certain authors have inspired you, but are there other things like music or art that inspires you and your work?
Oh, defo. I mentioned Chopin before, and I love rock and roll and a lot of contemporary music, but I probably regard Chopin's works as the pinnacle of music, of the music world. And there's a piece of music this isn't its official name, but it's called Raindrop. It's a piano piece. And I wrote a short story called Raindrop based on that. I listened to that a million times, and it just made the story pop into my head about this little boy, this single mother with a sort of precocious little boy who got on the piano, and then he disappears one night. So it's like a worst nightmare comes true. But then all this music starts to channel through her. And so she writes all this original music and she becomes a famous composer. And so she channels the grief of losing this boy. And then the boy sort of reappears in a Murakami-esque fashion. Murakami again. So Chopin, absolutely. I find that, that classical music especially like really moves me. Which sounds a bit pretentious, but it genuinely does. I don't even know what it is about it. It seems to, especially just solo piano pieces, especially the likes of Chopin and Tristesse. The obvious stuff. I am a bit of a dilettante, but I like the hits. But it moves me, and it moves me in a really sort of profound, not surface level kind of way. I don't really understand how it moves me because there's no words. I guess it just conjures in my own head its own stories, like why does this sound so sad, or why does that bit sound hopeful? And so that sort of stuff moves me and inspires me. All works of art, but paintings especially. I really, if it's something like Gustav Klimt is my favorite painter. And I went to Vienna a couple of summers ago to the Leopold Gallery and saw some of his most famous works. And I could have just stood there all day, to be honest with you. Mm. And I don't know what it is about it, but he paints women in this sort of weird, in this ghostly way, where it's almost photo real, their eyes especially, but at the same time, it's obviously painted. Like Rembrandt is like photorealistic. From a certain distance, it looks like a photo. But Gustav Klimt, it retains the sort of painted quality. But the eyes especially, and especially of the women, the Jewish women that he painted, was just like weirdly magnetic. And so similarly, that tells a story to me as well. And like all sorts of things, like why is she there? Like what's going on there? Why is there a skull next to her? What does that mean? Why is she holding a baby? Is the baby dead? Like what's all this, what's going on? So there's layers and layers and layers to that. Yeah, painting Egon Schiele. He was also in the Leopold. All those miserable Dutch paintings as well from like the 18th century, where you've got paintings of women, especially indoors, sort of with a bit of meager sunlight shone on them, and they're like maybe waiting for the mailman to come, or waiting. They always look like they're waiting. That's what intrigues me. So I always think, what's the story behind that? There's got to be a story behind that. So I regard painters as storytellers, to be honest.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Like Peter Bruegel as well, like the Middle Ages painter, used to paint these carnival-esque settings of like town squares where you could spend all day just with a magnifying glass looking at a guy with a bale of hay over there, and there's a guy getting drunk over there, and there's a woman selling apples there. But is she selling apples, or is something else going on? These weird, like sort of almost kaleidoscopic looking images. There's obviously a story going on there as well. So yeah, art galleries inspire me, absolutely. Photography, oh yeah, modern photography, like cityscapes and candid pictures of people at parties, paintings of decrepit buildings and abandoned buildings. And I just think, what's the story there? Why is it abandoned? Is there someone in there right now? Is there maybe a vagrant in there? Or there's painting. I went to see, there was an exhibition at the Tate Modern, I can't remember when, and it was these series of photos of the 1980s, so like the cocaine nights era of London, and it was all these swanky parties with champagne and stuff. And what was amazing to me was in these candid moments in the background, there's all these people look really unhappy with they're holding the champagne and they've got their expensive suits on and stuff. But why are they unhappy? What's going through their head? Interrogating photographs like that I find fascinating and inspiring as well, because they're telling a story. So yeah, I'm a visual person, visual learner, so paintings, photography.
Right.
stuff like that. It's all very inspiring to me.
Have you ever actually written anything based on a photograph or a painting that you've seen?
I wrote, not really, not a famous painting that I've seen. I've seen that done in other novels, so I think I wanted to avoid doing that. But photographs often play a part in my writing, and I wrote a book last year, which is not out yet. Hopefully it will be at some point. And there's a photograph that the main character finds quite early on of his fiance, of her when she was, say, 16, and she looks like a completely different person, and she's been held up by three guys, sort of like in a pin-up style. I don't know if you can picture that, but so, led horizontally, and three guys are holding her. Not in a creepy way, just sort of last day of school, joking around kind of way. And he goes deep into this photograph, and for the whole book, he sort of gets it out of his wallet every so often and looks at it and wonders who those guys are, what was going on there, why she looks so sort of different in terms of her demeanor in that photograph, and is she the same person now, or can he trust that, which one's the real her, basically. And so I play around with that in some other books as well. And I haven't written about a famous painting, but a critic in the Irish Times described one of the scenes in This Little Dark Place as Bruegelian. So he's referring to the scene. The scene in the book is we would call it a gala day. I guess the most American comparison would be sort of Mardi Gras at New Orleans or New Orleans. So similar sort of thing, like floats driving down the road, people drinking in the streets and stuff like that, party atmosphere. And this is sort of in the book, it's just after the Brexit votes happened and all these people are celebrating that. And this critic said that was Bruegelian, and I guess he was right, and maybe I was picturing one of those paintings. So I haven't written about a painting, but I guess it came out in that way.
Yeah, and it sounds like quite a compliment.
Oh God, yeah, I took it as a massive compliment.
Yeah,
I thought, oh yeah, of course. What a great way to describe it. That's a way better way of describing my work than I could have done.
I always think it's interesting, like you have someone read something or critique something of yours, and they're like, oh yeah, I totally see what you did here, and then with these themes and this and that. And you're like, yeah, totally spot on. And you're like, I never know I did that.
Yeah. That's happened a bunch of times. And yeah, you're right. You just say, I just sort of nod and go, yeah, okay. Yeah, interesting perspective you've got there. But there's a school of thought that says, okay, well, you might not have consciously written it with those things in mind, but the subconscious is a powerful engine as well. So maybe it seeps out in that way. And do you know when you're talking, any sort of meeting situation, especially a professional meeting situation, and you sort of off the cuff saying all these things, someone asks you for your opinion, they go, tell me, what do you think of this? And you just start talking, right? And you say, I think A and B and C. And actually, it had never occurred, A, B, and C had never occurred to you until the words have passed through your lips. So does the thought precede the utterance, or the other way around? Do you solidify your own opinion because you said it out loud? Or was the thought always there and you just vocalized it because you've just been given the platform to do so? So it might be the same with writing. You might start writing tomorrow. If I said to you, okay, write 500 words now about anything you want, something's just going to come out of you that's inside of you as we speak now. You don't have time to think about it. So maybe it's the same. And actually, the way I write is there's not a lot of pre-thought that goes into it. There's planning in terms of where I'm going next with the plot. But in terms of the actual act of sitting down and getting the prose down, I try and just get into a flow, like a Zen-like state almost. It's not as pretentious as it sounds. All I mean by that basically is I don't pore over every word and every line. I just trust the training. I just trust the practice. And by training, I mean reading smarter people than me. And hopefully that just manifests in good quality prose, which it seems to. So maybe that's just what happens. Maybe the act is just externalizing something that you actually did genuinely think in the first place. So when people at parties say, oh, I thought this and I thought that, and instinctively you think, I don't think I actually did. If you think about it, maybe you did.
reading is one of the best things you can do to be a better writer. And then, of course, everyone's got their own creative processes. Would you say you're more of a pantser or a plotter or a plantser?
Is plantser in between?
Mm-hmm,
okay,
mm-hmm.
Right. Just getting the vernacular right before I answer. Then I've been religious about plotting to this point. So I've written loads of books, and I've always plotted them quite meticulously, actually. So I'll give myself what I think about as lily pads to leap from one scene to the next. I guess the equivalent would be when a filmmaker storyboards. I sort of do that. And then the actual dialogue and exposition and whatever else just comes out naturally when I sit down and, like I say, get into a flow. So I've done that until this book. But my agent suggested you should have a go at like literary fiction. And once I got my head around that, because that's all I read, basically, literary fiction, whatever that is. So once I got my head around that, I had to change my approach, because I've always ended up writing books that are very plot driven. And, obviously This Little Dark Place is a thriller. It became more of a thriller in the publishing of it than it was originally. But now I'm writing my first intentionally literary novel. And so I didn't plot at all. My agent's advice was just see what comes out. So with that freedom, I still, as a legacy of my religious plotting, I still couldn't quite just sit down with an empty page. That was a bit scary for me. So I rather than think of a plot, I just thought about a couple of interesting people, characters. So I just came up with these siblings, Ronnie and Harriet, that live together. They're adults now. And I just started describing a day in the life of Ronnie, and then describing a day in the life of Harriet. And a plot has just organically seemed to sprout from that. So this is new for me, this process, and it was scary. In fact, it still is scary. I mean, I'm probably only a quarter of the way through the first draft, and it is scary, but it's also inspiring because it's liberating. And I'm finding that with the freedom of plot, with the choice being, in my hands every day, where I can take this story next, that's also giving me freedom on the prose side of things as well. And I'm finding that the stuff I'm writing with this book is a bit more, it's not lyrical, but it's just more creative. I can't really think of a better word. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not just jumping from the lily pad I'm currently on to the next lily pad. I could put a snorkel on and deep dive to the next lily pad, or I could do the breaststroke, or I could do the backstroke. So it's all on the table, and that's scary, but also really exciting. So every day I sit down at this crummy old laptop to write, I'm like, okay, I kind of know what's going to happen next in this scene, but how am I going to describe that? How am I going to portray that? It's what's interesting to me is that what's coming out is dark comedy. So I've previously written, I love comedy. We talked about this before we recorded, but I've always ended up writing things that are sort of emotional or sinister or dark, generally with someone dying in it. I don't really know why. But this one, it's just coming out as funny and in a sinister, dark way, in sort of a peep show kind of way, which is really interesting to me and exciting. And I have no idea how my agent's going to react when she reads it. I hope she isn't sort of just spitting feathers and wondering why she told me to try my hand at this, but I don't think she will. I hopefully she'll have an open mind, but I'm really loving it, this process. And what I found during lockdown 1, so March 2020, was I had this new book I was writing, a thriller. It was designed as intentionally as a follow-up to This Little Dark Place. So I plotted that heavily, and I was really grateful for the grounding it gave me. The process-driven way that I approached writing that book was really reassuring in that time, because I was working from home every day, like everyone is now. But at the time, it was a departure. Having that anchor point of sitting down to write my 500 a day, 5 days a week. That was the way I used to do it. 2,500 a week, 10,000 a month was really reassuring to me. And but this year, having grown entirely bored of lockdown and having grown entirely bored of working from home and completely used to it, I'm actually now grateful for the other way of approaching it, with the sort of free fall, where am I going to land feeling of this new approach. So yeah, that's a lot. So that's the way lockdown it affected my work, really. So yeah, we'll see what happens, because now, then there'll be a hybrid approach when we start going back in the office again later in the summer, at least for half of the week, you know. So I'll be sitting here writing a couple of days a week, and then the other 3 days of the week or 2 days of the week, I'll have to go back to the old way of working, which was getting up early, getting my 500 words done, and then getting on the tube to go to the office. Maybe that'll produce even more interesting and exciting results. Who knows? Watch this space. I'll send you a copy of the second draft if you want.
Oh, I'd love to, especially as a person who, the way you described writing this current piece where you just sit down and you just see what comes out. That's how I write all the time.
Is it?
It is. It's very hard for me to write the other way. I've tried, and it's like being pinned to a table, you know?
Painful.
Yes. So the other way is just so freeing, and you just end up, you just never know. It's like getting in the car without a destination and being like, okay, I'm going to take a road trip.
I like that.
You just never know what you're going to encounter,
You could run out of petrol, though.
True. And that would be a story. That would be a plot point. Right?
Yeah. As long as you got a notebook with you, then there's no wasted day.
Yes. Very true. But that is very interesting about your creative process. You trying to change or experiment with your own creative process after doing something for so long, and how it's the antithesis of what's going on in your real life. Like you're trying to be more creative and free during a time in which you were locked down. It's like you couldn't get out in the real world, but you can get out on the page.
I think that's a really good analysis. And the way you just put that sounds right. Maybe it was something I was looking for. My agent to suggest this was a blessing, because maybe I was just looking for a way to feel free, because we're very much not free at the moment. I mean, I'm not an anti-lockdown person. They go around saying we're not free. You know what I mean by that? I'm not genuinely saying my freedom's been taken away from me, but it feels a bit more restricted, a bit more confined way of living. So maybe this is my way of taking some freedom back. But I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah, curious to see how it turns out, and I'm very curious to see if it will sort of bleed into other projects after that, or if you'll even mold a whole new version of a creative process with a mix of the lily pads and the mix of the just see where it goes.
Maybe there's a hybrid thriller and literary crossover in there in the future. But my agent envisages doing the A.S. Hatch stuff, the thrillers and aimed at the crime reading audience, and then maybe under a slightly different name, doing the literary stuff as a different strand. And I like that. I like the delineation, and I think maybe I'll flip-flop between the two. So after I've written this book, I'll probably go back, because I've got loads ready to go, like fully plotted in my iPhone. I don't mean written in the iPhone, I mean like the plot in the notes. So, I could start writing one tomorrow. So maybe I'll probably flip-flop between thriller, literary. And, it doesn't matter what happens with them. I love doing it, so I'll be doing it for the rest of my life. I know I will. Every so often you get the hump with it, like every writer does, and you just think, I'm the worst writer in the world. No one's ever been worse than me. But then you actually read it back, sometimes even just a few hours later, and think, oh, actually, that's really good. What was I worried about? I'm pretty sure that's something all writers can relate to. Even, the Hilary Mantels of the world, like double Booker Prize winners. I bet even she has moments where she's like, oh. But then later on, maybe after a cup of tea or something, she'll go, oh, actually, it's pretty good. I'm not bad at this. And I go through that every day. It's horrible. It's obsessive, and it sort of dictates my mental state. I think there's a really good quote. I'm not going to try and quote it verbatim, but I'll paraphrase it by, I think it was Hemingway. If I haven't written anything, I'm miserable. If I'm going to write something but I haven't done it yet, I'm miserable. The only happy state is having just written something. And it's true. So it's like a drug addiction, isn't it?
It's so true.
It's like when I've written 350 words or 400 words of good prose, and I'll like wheel back away from the desk a little bit and then make the robot woman on Word read it aloud to me, and it sounds all right, I'll think, actually, this world's not too bad, is it? like I can handle this life. But then if I go a day where I've been too busy to write just because of the day job or whatever else, moving house, or United are on, or I'm miserable because United have lost again, so I haven't written anything that day, I'll be like, oh, why am I so down in the dumps? And I know why. It's because I haven't written anything. So it's like an addict when he can't get hold of his fix. I guess that's the closest comparison, really. But this is, I guess, there's no danger of overdosing or.
Yeah, there's definitely valleys and hills of the writing process. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk more with author Andrew Hatch about his life in the creative arts. Please consider saving the lives of the popular wiener dog breed, also known as Dachshunds. One such organization is Dachshund Rescue of Houston. They're an entirely volunteer-based 501c3 organization that rescues and rehomes dogs through their foster network. If you'd like to learn more or to make a donation, visit droh.org. That's DROH.org. And thanks always for listening. Hey listeners, if you're looking for more podcasts like mine, Creative Piecemeal, check out the Music Therapy Podcast, Musician's Dish with Robin and Audra, Inside the Musician's Brain with Christopher Pandolfi, Rhapsody in Reverie, or even Entrepreneur Creative Careers podcast, all available to stream on your favorite podcast app. And we're back with author Andrew Hatch.
Hello again.
And how has your life in the creative arts been different than you imagined?
Oh, wow. It's been very different. I mean, I had an image of what it would be like before, and I think that was mostly through TV. I thought that when you got a book deal, you'd be taken to the office, and you'd all clink glasses and get drunk on champagne, and then toast your success, and then you'd go away and sell 85,000 copies in the first month, and then they'd be offering you more money for the next book. Didn't really happen like that. The reality of it was, look, it was super exciting for me. It was all this is all I've ever wanted to do, and it was my life ambition to get traditionally published. So it really was a dream come true when that happened. But the way it happened was, I don't know, a little bit more mundane than people might think. Certainly was for me. It was all, I mean, the most exciting point for me really was when you're querying, everyone's been there, and you're querying, you're trying to get an agent. I was querying agents when I lived in Australia for a brief time. So I was querying agents with, you mentioned in the preamble, Los Gigantes, the novel. So I wrote that back in 2012. And so I submitted that to a bunch of agents in Melbourne and in London. I was living in Melbourne. And a couple of them were really interested, including the one I'm now with. But what happened with that book was the London-based agent wanted an exclusive read of it. So when you submit the first sort of 3 chapters or whatever, 12,000 words, they've all got different requirements. So check that. It's often on their website. Once you've submitted that original excerpt, they'll either say thanks but no thanks, or can we read the whole thing, or can we read it exclusively, as in we don't want anyone else to read it whilst we're reading it, which is a good sign. So they did that, and I obviously said yes. So the Melbourne one was out of the running. So a bit of a gamble for the writer, but at the same time, if anyone shows any interest, you snap their hand off. A few months went by, they got back to me to say, we finished it, love it, we just want to do a few things. Would you be up for that? And so I said, yeah, okay, depends what they are. So then I worked with this agent's sort of editorial person for a couple of months over the summer of 2012. And in the September of that year, the owner of the company, who's now my agent actually, ultimately passed on it. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because that was a real blow. I mean, that was a hammer blow, not only to all the work I'd put in that summer. It just felt like, God, the publishing industry is this impenetrable thing. How the hell are you meant to crack that egg? When I got that rejection at the very final stage with this agent, I just was floored by it. But fast forward to 2016, I wrote a book called The Moorings, which is a romantic coming of age novel. And I had been so afraid of sending any work to any agents since that happened in 2012 that it took me basically nearly 4 years to submit again. And I just thought, you know what, face your fear. Although I can't take my own medicine because I'm still terrified of spiders. And whenever one appears, I'm just out of the room. So if it's of a certain size, I can deal with the tiny ones now, but so that's growth. But face your fears. So I thought, right, send this book to that agent who rejected you. Just see what happens, because you'll regret it if you don't. And what actually happened was, and this is when you've asked me what the experience of the creative industry is like, or something like that. The moment this is still the best moment to this day, including the moment I got the offer of the publishing deal from the publisher a couple of years later. I was working out in my flat. It was summer 2016. I had practically forgotten about the submission I had made, because I just thought, well, that doesn't happen. That's not going to happen. It's at least I tried. And then out of the blue, I just got this email saying, we've read your new novel and we just want to say we remember you from 2012 and we're so grateful you stuck with us because we want to meet with you to discuss representation for for your work. So that was, even if I had never gotten published after that, I would always have had that moment. And it was just probably the best moment of my life in terms of professional moment. I think the best moment of my life is when United won the Champions League in 1999. But that was a close second or third. But in all seriousness, it was a really sweet moment and vindication, and it restored my self-esteem and my confidence, and it was a good, strong, positive start to my career in the professional world of writing, and it was amazing. We had this great meeting the following week where they sort of gushed about this novel that I'd written, which was so bizarre to me and so surreal because virtually no one had ever read my work before. A few close friends had, but to hear these professionals describe and quote my own words back to me was so surreal. It honestly felt like a dream. I remember the day the meeting was set up, I really ummed and ahed over my outfit, and I chose a white shirt. I just went for a classic sort of white shirt, blue trousers, and I slicked my hair back, I think. And yeah, I probably looked so nervous. And what was funny was she was like a spider. She was as nervous about me as I was about her, because I think she assumed I had multiple offers on the table, because when I went in there, she said, so after, we chit-chatted, had a biscuit, she was like, so are you interested? And that was her saying that to me. So I was sort of under the impression that it was already agreed. So in my naivety, so I said, well, yeah, obviously, of course. And we all laughed because we were all sort of afraid of who was going to speak first. And they didn't know if I was going there to drive a hard deal, and I didn't know if they were actually going to offer a contract or not. But they did, and that was an amazing moment. Then getting a publisher takes longer than you think. So that was one thing that surprised me. So we didn't find a publisher for that first novel. We got very, very close to a deal with Transworld, who are a major publisher. They did Girl on the Train and The Book Thief, so major successes. And they were really interested in The Moorings. And what was really heartbreaking was in December of 2016. So this was about, I signed with Eve White in August 2016. The Moorings, we did a bit of polishing. The Moorings went out on submission that November. There was immediate interest from Transworld and a couple of others. Transworld were the most serious, and their senior commissioning editor was very complimentary. She was saying things like, oh, we really need more young literary male authors. So Andrew fits the bill. We could grow him, that sort of stuff. Really exciting stuff to hear I think I was 30 then, 31. And it got all the way through to the acquisition. So it got read by her team. They'd all signed off on it. got through to the acquisitions meeting, which is basically this final stage where it's the round table meeting where the editorial team pitch the books that they want the company to acquire to the marketing guys and girls, to the sales girls and guys, and everyone else, or the heads of those departments. And they couldn't get it over. She couldn't get it over the line. The sales team vetoed the deal, and the reason being was something nebulous, like, oh, we don't know if we can clearly market it in one genre or another, because it seems to straddle commercial fiction and literary fiction. It seems to straddle romance and dark, whatever, thrillers. So because they didn't have the vision to, I sound bitter because I am, because they didn't have the vision to think of a way to effectively market the book, they just decided not to buy the book. So that was really horrible. That was a really bad day. But to get that close, Tammy, was awful. But what happened was I licked my wounds for a couple of weeks, and then on New Year's Day 2017, I thought back on all of the Christmas period, which was a really miserable Christmas because of that. I was thinking about, okay, what would a successful person do in this moment? And a successful person, well, they wouldn't slope off and hide in their den and start, binging on Breaking Bad with some Pringles. They'd get back on the horse, wouldn't they? And they'd start riding again. So over that period, that's when I read De Profundis by Oscar Wilde. So an angry book. I wanted to read something angry. So I read that. And I had always had this idea in my head about someone in prison corresponding with someone on the outside, and then a relationship forming through that. And that's why I sought out De Profundis, because I knew what it was about. So I read that, and then it just started coming to my head, this plot. And then on New Year's Day, I sat down and I wrote the first page of what became This Little Dark Place. It was called October then. And so the act of writing was pure therapy. But before the end of January, before the middle of January 2017, I was over it. I was like, what's the Moorings? I don't even care about that book. I'm obsessed with this new book. I couldn't think of anything other than this book I was writing. I said to my agent, I'm working on something new, which she, was obviously she said, look, it happens, deals fall through, you're brand new, just get back on the horse, write something. So I told her I'm writing something new. And I think I mentioned earlier in this interview, I do 10,000 words a month. Well, that was my old process. So I worked out the length of the book that I wanted it to be, factoring in a bit of editing time. I said, I'll have a first draft with you in October. So she was like, okay, cool. So she rang me in October. She'd obviously diarized it. She rang me when I was in the office in October. We'd emailed and stuff over the summer. How's it going? How's the book? She rang me in October and she was like, right, so I'm ringing you because you said you'd have a book ready in October. And I was like, I was actually just in the process of drafting an email to you, attaching it as a first draft. And she was like, wow, okay, that's like clockwork. So she said, how many words is it? And I told her it's 134,000 words. And she was like, oh. And I was like, is that a problem? She said, for a debut, I don't think we're gonna, you need to get rid of a load of words. I was like, how many words? She was like, maybe half. So I was like, oh my God. So I was going to see Salman Rushdie speak about his new novel like that week with my Irish friend Carol, who I told you about earlier, who told me to read Bronte. And so I queued up to meet Salman Rushdie and get my book signed. And, like a dithering idiot, I sort of, with a shaky voice, spoke to him. I was like, Salman, a bit of advice for a young author. And he was like, go on. And in the middle of signing, he sort of like closes the book and looks at me, go on. So I was like, right, I've just written this book and my agent said it's too long, but I don't think I can cut the amount of words that she wants me to cut. And he was like, just do the cuts. He was like, shorter is better. Wow, great advice. We went on holiday, me and my other half, to Greece. And all I was thinking about the whole holiday was, oh God, right, which bits am I going to have to lose here? I loved them all. That was the problem. But actually, if you look at it with objectivity, it's not all great. It never is, unless you're David Foster Wallace. So by the time I got back from holiday, I knew the bits that could go more easily. And I got it down to about 95,000. Took another week, got it down to about 89,000. And then I submitted it to the agent. And so this was like late October. So nearly 10 months, like to the day, since the Transworld deal fell through at the last stage. And then I was really on Spilkers because, you know, I was really scared about, I hadn't really revealed anything about this book to her. I hadn't told her what it was about, hadn't told her, all she knew was the general gist, you know, prison, correspondence, blah, 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 Oscar Wilde. And I think on Halloween, which is actually the date in the book is really important because stuff happens on Halloween. And she emailed me to say, I've just cried, finished your book and I've just cried. You are so clever. And it was like, oh, my body just sort of released energy. Like I felt like I was on cloud nine, couldn't believe it. And then, you know, her editorial assistant felt the same way. So I knew I'd done something right. And because it always crosses your mind, was the last one a fluke? Can I do it again? Did I just get lucky? Did it strike a chord with someone who happened to be in the right mood? So to write another one and to get that sort of review of it was incredible. And then so we had a meeting where she laid out the tactics for the submission round. We're going to send it to XYZ publisher. And if that doesn't work, we'll send it to ABC. So what was interesting was the first round of submissions went pretty badly. There wasn't much interest at all. And we went for some drinks, me and my agent and her assistant, near her flat in Pimlico, lovely area. I couldn't afford to live there. We went for cocktails and we discussed potential edits and we all had some ideas. And basically I unclogged a little bit of backstory that was maybe a little bit of a barrier to getting into the book. And once we did that, we got loads of interest. So it was almost like you showed me your French fry sunglasses before. It was almost like removing semi-opaque sunglasses for these publishers. It was like, oh, they finally got it. So then there was a bunch of interest. And the publisher that finally I went with were very complimentary. And something nice they really said was, it's obvious Andrew's got something special. And I'll never forget that, even if I never get published again, because all I had ever wanted was to be good at one thing in life. Like I'm a pretty middle of the road drummer. I'm an okay singer. I was rubbish at football. But, you know, I'm pretty good at writing and I know that now. And it's taken me years to be able to actually say that and with confidence. And it's things like that, like the commissioning editor saying, it's pretty clear he's got something special. So the deal was done in April. So, you know, it takes a long bloody time, you know, maybe 4 or 5 months. The deal was done in April. And then we spent that summer editing it. And I loved that process. I really genuinely loved that work. I think any true writer would love that work, and any true writer would welcome the critique that you get through that process. And if you read the acknowledgements in This Little Dark Place, I thank Cecily Gayford, who is my editor, for pushing me, and she made the work better, and that is the ultimate compliment. And you just have to enter that process with humility, and especially as a debut author, you have to have humility, and ultimately you become a better writer through that process. And got nothing but praise for her and her genius and her insight, really. And another thing that surprised me about the publishing industry was how bloody clever they all are. Like, these people notice things I just never would notice. I don't mean mistakes. There weren't many mistakes. There was certainly no grammar mistakes, but I just mean things like, oh, maybe if this scene came a few pages later, then these things would happen. And so think about that. And you're like, oh my God, yeah, that's brilliant. Obviously, they've been doing it for their livelihood for years, so they know a thing or two about how to structure a novel. But I was just watching them do this with awe, and yeah, it's amazing. I would say, with humility, it was a team effort. It's my name on the front cover, but there's so many clever people that go behind it. Yeah, it was really exciting. All the way through to the marketing meetings we had, where they'd come up with these amazing boxes. I mean, there's a wooden box in the book, which is a key item. No spoilers, but there's a big wooden crate in the book, which when you read it, you'll see why it's important. And what the marketing department did for Serpent's Tail, they made wooden boxes and got them all painted with this Little Dark Place logo on it. And inside there was it was sort of like a bunch of Easter eggs, photographs of twins torn down the middle, a prescription for drugs, and all these items that are clues to what was in the book. I couldn't believe the effort and expertise that went into that. Everything's planned so precisely. Like, we're gonna write to these magazines in this month. We're gonna write to these newspapers in that month. We're gonna get you on these podcasts. We're gonna get you these festivals, and then by that point, this will happen, and blah blah blah. And I was just like, yeah, okay, cool. This sounds amazing. This is a dream. So there were some, really cool moments like that, where it was like you think it's going to be. And there was, a nice summer. The publisher throws a party every summer. So I got to meet Sarah Perry, who met, the Essex Serpent, and Mel Moth. She's their cash cow, really. She's the big hitter at that publisher. And it was really cool to meet her and actually think of her as, obviously not, I'm not there yet in terms of sales, certainly nowhere near, but we were both published by the same people. So we were both authors at this, this party, and that was really weird to me. And another really cool moment was, I know I'm going off piste from what you actually asked me, but I went to Waterstones, which is a chain of bookstores in this country, and I saw one of my favorite authors, Michel Houellebecq, who's French. A French author, really contemporary, writes exactly the sort of stuff. It's almost as though he's designed it for me. It's sort of lurid, dark, humorous, obscene stuff. And it's amazing, especially Atomized, or The Elementary Particles, depending on which language you read it in. And I saw one of his books on the shelf, and an edition of that book, I had read it, but not this edition of it. And I picked it up, and it was published by my publisher. And I couldn't believe it. I was so moved by this. I took to Instagram, which is very unlike me. And I was like, look at this. I've just seen one of my heroes, and we're published by the same people. So that was amazing to me. Yeah, so it was really cool. And a lot of surprising things, like the length of time it took to get the book on the shelves. I listened to one of your podcasts earlier with the romance author, and she said the same thing. But it is a very long process. And you need stamina, you need legs for this industry. You need a thick skin, because you still, after you're a published author, you still get rejected. Let me tell you, you still get rejected. So get ready for that, people, if you want to do this. But you know what? It's really worth it, and it was super exciting, and it was a dream come true. And I'm now striving to make that happen a second time, and then I will strive to make it happen a third time. And yeah, so that's where I am.
Excellent. And and it's all you can do is just keep going and keep growing and creating and exploring and seeing what output comes. There's rejection across every field of the creative and fine arts, but I noticed that, when someone has such a drive and such a passion, like, yes, the rejection's going to hurt, but you can still get up and rise from the ashes and keep going, you know, because the passion is just there and you just can't help it. You can't get off the passion train. You can't not create.
Absolutely. Yeah, you become this wizened, toughened creature through the rejections, and it makes you look inward for new routes to creativity, because, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. So you need to change your angle of approach. You need to put a bit of topspin on the ball this time, or a bit of slice on the ball this time. You know, don't just hit it through the center of the racket. You know, you'll just get it batted straight back. So it forces you to evolve, and forces you to grow creatively. And actually, when you watch documentaries about all the successful artists, you know, people like Nina Simone, who we now regard as, I would probably say, maybe the most naturally gifted vocalist I've ever heard of that style. The rejection and the hardship she went through to get to where she was insane. And there's another documentary as well, another one about singers, where I think it's called 20 Feet from Stardom on Netflix. And it's about backing singers and what they have to go through to get a slice of success for themselves, and people that are really, really seasoned performers that just can't get a record deal as an artist in their own right. And so there's many ways to success, but they're all booby trapped. You just have to be ready to dodge them and get Indiana Jones on their ass and leap around a bit and stay on your feet if you can. And if you get knocked off your feet, then cling on with your hands instead. But it's a long journey, but nothing that is worth doing is easy. I know that is such a platitude, but it's so true. It's just true. If it's hard, it's probably because there's value in doing it.
Right. And, you know, and sometimes things can come easy and you can be talented at it, but there's still a journey, you know, it's still difficult. You know, along those lines, how would you like to be remembered as an author?
I'd like to be remembered as someone that could put a sentence together. I admire all authors. You know, I admire authors that are entirely concerned with plot and telling a darn good yarn. And I read them, you know, I love them. And the same with screenwriters. I would love to be a screenwriter one day. I think I will try my hand at that, because, you know, proper films, when they're written well, I regard them as pieces of literature. Telling a story, there's a real art to that. There's a science to it, but I think it's 70-30 in favor of art. But what I mean by I want to be remembered as a guy that could put a sentence together, I mean, I'm referring to writing as an art form in its purest sense of expression. You know, when people talk about the likes of Ernest Hemingway, that's the obvious one, isn't it? People always talk about Hemingway as having this really distilled way of writing, this really apparently simple way of writing. And, you know, he was seeking the true sentence, or whatever it was, the perfect way to write a sentence. That's the craft. And I want to be remembered as a craftsman. It's great if people read This Little Dark Place to me, and it's great to me if they just remark on the story and how it moved them and how the ending totally sent them off balance and all that stuff. And those are techniques that you can learn and implement as a writer. And you get sharper at that through the editing process. But what I prefer is when people say, oh, I liked when you said this, or I like this observation, or I like that bit of language, or you write beautifully, or something like that. That means more to me than someone saying, oh, really cool story. I guess there's a happy medium where you can tell a great story with beautiful language. That's the ultimate. And God, there's people out there that do that, and they win the Booker Prize most years. Margaret Atwood's a great example. I don't regard Margaret Atwood as one of the great sentence creators. I mean, I don't think she would regard herself as like obsessed with prose. Her prose is beautiful, and it's, you know, elegant and simple. I think the beauty is in the simplicity of the best writing. And like I said earlier, the mark of a confident writer is one that can write in a simple way, like Ali Smith. So I would like to be remembered as as an artist, really, not someone that creates products that sell loads of, like, you know, publishers are always looking for the next Girl on the Train or the next The Silent Patient or whatever sold 2 million copies last year. They want that now. And yeah, wow, wouldn't it be great for a publisher to say, all right, we want to put some money behind you to write that sort of stuff? And who would say no to that? Hats off to them who can do it. But I would be completely happy with a career with more modest levels of success commercially, but I was recognized by other writers as a great writer. You know, I think I mentioned earlier, I've only ever wanted to be good at one thing. If I used to say when I was a kid, my only ambitions in life are to enjoy myself and to feel proud of myself. And I've been saying that since I was about 8. And I still believe that today. And you can ask my mum, I genuinely did used to say that. And so that ties in with that. I've only ever wanted to be truly great at one thing. You know, I'm not a polymath, I'm not Da Vinci or that dude from Iron Maiden who can fly planes and perform surgery or something stupid like that. One thing, that's enough for me. So if I can be remembered as a great writer, a guy that can put a sentence together, God, he can put a sentence together, like that sort of thing. I want people to see me in the street and go, I know who that guy is. God, he can put a sentence together. I'd be happy with that.
That sounds great. Definitely a wonderful thing to aspire to. And I think you can definitely put a sentence together, but I am just one person.
That's fine. I'll take it. That's
there you go. Boom. Your life is complete.
It is. It is. No, it does. It genuinely means a lot. I mean, you're a writer yourself. You're a creative person. It does mean a lot. It doesn't matter who says it. It means a lot every time. So sincerely, Tammy, thank you for that compliment.
You're welcome. You're welcome. One final question.
Oh, are we at the end?
Sadly, for now.
Okay.
One final question is, what does living a creative life mean to you?
Good question. For me, I would say living a creative life means obsession. And by that, I mean, for example, I was walking through Southwark Park this morning. That's the only way I can get my steps now because I'm not going to the office at the moment. So I go to Southwark Park every morning, and that's where I do all my best thinking. I get to look at all the dogs chasing the birds idiotically and admire them, and that's where I do my best thinking. And I was thinking this morning obsessively about the scene I wrote yesterday in my work in progress. And then I thought about it on the way home. And then when I logged into work and I was in a meeting, I was thinking about it then. And I was thinking about it when I was making my salmon and cream cheese sandwich. And I was thinking about it when I was eating the sandwich. You can see where I'm going. That for me that marks out a creative person. Whether you're writing a piece of music or you're working on a painting, it's all you can think about. It keeps me up at night. It stresses me out. It makes me happy. It makes me sad. It makes me despondent. It makes me joyous. And I'm grateful for the obsession. I welcome it. It's draining, but for me, a creative mind, a creative brain has to operate like that. You have to, if you have aspirations to be great at something, you have to be obsessed with it. And I would like to become great at this thing. I'm not yet. I would like to become that. So it's practice. It's training. So whether you're sitting at your laptop or you're in a coffee shop with a notepad or not, if you're just walking through the park, you can still be training. You can be thinking about it. You can be thinking, oh, should I have stuck to the rule of not using adverbs? Should I have just said she said instead of she called? And that sort of stuff bothers the creative person. It's like some painters are famously just dissatisfied with their own work, and they just constantly go back and dab more paint on here and there and clean bits of paint off there and scrape bits off here. And they would be doing that for years and years and years if they could. But the paintings get purchased, and that's the only thing that stops them. I think that's a creative life, a creative mind. So obsession, healthy obsession, if there's such a thing.
Right, yes. I definitely think, when someone finds their niche and finds their creative purpose in life, it's hard to not be obsessed, because it's all consuming because it fulfills your soul.
That's a good way of describing it. Absolutely. Yeah, it does. It does fill your soul. And it provides me with balance as well. I would genuinely feel lopsided without having a project on the go. I would feel like I was sort of listing into like miserable, just professional mediocrity. It would, if the only thing I had to think about was the meeting I've got tomorrow at my day job, I think I'd be really depressed. So it balances me out. It tugs me in the other direction and straightens me out. So it's good for mental health as well. It's bad and good.
It is. Excellent. Well, Andrew Hatch, thank you so much for joining the podcast. And listeners, in the show notes, you can click on links to check out his websites and links to purchase his books. And there will also be links for his social media so you can connect and chat with him about books and music.
Yeah, and I will respond.
Excellent. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me, Tammy. It's been so much fun.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.